Good morning, correction, good evening. I'd like to welcome everyone to the Audit Committee of the Whole. Today's date, December 6, 2022. My name is James Patterson. I'm the Audit Chair. So I would like to call the Audit Committee meeting of the Whole to order. Let's see here. It appears that there are no speakers to address the Audit Committee this evening. And moving on to number 3, a review and acceptance of the minutes. The minutes for our last Audit Committee meeting on October 4th, 2022. Can I have a motion to accept the minutes for the October 4th Audit Committee meeting?
So moved.
Moved by
Second.
Commissioner Loy and seconded by Commissioner Adams. It's going to be a verbal vote, or can we vote online? Both?
Madam Clerk, I'm not signed in yet, so you may have to take mine verbally.
Also, mine needs to be taken.
Those both, yes?
Yes.
Beatrice? I don't see it pop up. Oh, it was a verbal vote first. Oh, yeah.
Oh, aye.
Okay.
Did we call for a vote?
No.
Did you say all of those in favor?
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
Now online voting is open.
I can't get on board.
2, actually.
I'm not there. Yeah.
All set?
Commissioner Powell, would you like me to?
It was an aye. Yeah.
And Elliott. All set?
Are you all set, Anissa?
Yes, I am.
Okay. Moving forward, number 4, resolution consideration. We need to consider resolution 279 for suspension appeals. Can I have a motion to consider resolution 279
So moved.
by
Second.
Commissioner Malloy, seconded by Commissioner Adams, if I'm correct? Any comments or questions regarding this resolution? And can we have a verbal vote?
Aye.
Oh, I'm sorry. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any questions?
Online voting is open. President Elliott, would you like me to vote?
Yes. My password is,
No problem. You're all set?
All set?
Yes.
All right, moving forward, point 5, Audit Committee discussion items. Next item on our agenda is an update from our Auditor General and a presentation by Fried Maxick, our external auditor.
actually, it is.
So tonight we have Fried Maxick. This is the 5th year of our 5-year audit RFP. After I finish speaking, we will have Catherine Barrett speak to us about the financial results for the year ended June 30th, 2022. This year, or for this session, we were actually fortunate enough to complete single audit, contract for excellence, as well as the regular financial audit. If you recall, the last 2 cycles we had, the single audit work was delayed due to a delay in the governmental uniform guidance for that. I would like to just turn over to Catherine Barrett.
Good evening. Thank you for having me. We do have a copy of our audit presentation in front of you. I believe it's going to be put up on the screen. The audit went very well again this year. We did do the audit completely remotely. It's a lot of work to get ready for an audit. There's a lot of documentation that we request and that we review, and I publicly want to thank your accounting department for complying with all of our requests and making the information available to us in a very timely manner so that we're able to complete all 3 audits, as requested by, mid-November. It was no small feat. The opinion letters on all of our reports were what we call unmodified, and that's the highest level of assurance that we can provide in any audit. It means that we identify no material misstatements in your financial information and that you comply with all government or generally accepted accounting standards. You do have a qualified report on the extracurricular activities, however. That's pretty consistent with what it was previously. It's very difficult to have a unqualified or unmodified opinion in the extracurricular activities just because of the volume of transactions, the fact that these are activities that are run by students, for students. Advisors are doing this almost on a volunteer basis. But I have to say we did see some improvement in the number of findings that we had this year. So we are moving in the right direction with respect to the extracurricular activities. Anissa mentioned the single audit report. We were able to complete that concurrently with the financial audit this year. I'm happy to say that we had no findings with respect to that report, no internal control findings, and no non-compliance findings. The other report is the contract for excellence. If you remember last year, we did not complete the agreed upon procedures for the contracts for excellence because of some filings that did not occur. We were able to complete that this year, and we had no findings with regard to that contract for excellence. And that's an agreed upon procedure where the commissioner tells us what we need to look at, and we evaluate the data that's provided to us by the district to receive those contracts for excellence funding. Next page, we talk about our audit plan. It was initially presented to the committee back in, I think, May. I'm happy to say that we proceeded with the audit. Following that plan, we did not have to make any modifications to that plan. That's all very good news. What that means is that we were well prepared for the audit. We have a lot of conversations with the district personnel before the audit even starts, so we understand, what happened during the year, any unusual transactions, any pain points that they're concerned about, and we design an audit plan specifically for Rochester City School District based on those conversations, so that when we say we didn't need to change that audit plan, that means we were well prepared and we didn't run into anything that we were not anticipating. No unusual transactions. We've been talking about implementation of GASB 87 for the last couple of years. We did implement that, or the school did implement that this year, and all the records were made available to us with that implementation, and we found that there were no deviations in that information, that you complied with all the implementation standards. No additional risks were identified during our audit. The risks that we identified at the time of planning included management override of internal controls, compliance, and internal controls over revenue transactions. Those are pretty consistent with risks that we identify in all governmental audits. Not that you have any higher risk than anybody else in this area. Those are high risks in any audit, and we didn't identify any additional risks as the result of our audit. Next pages, we talk about some of the financial highlights. If you remember, the financial statements that you have two sets of financial statements on two different bases of accounting, one being the government-wide basis and that includes all of your long-term assets and liabilities. It's like looking at your own financial portfolio, you know, all the assets that you own, all the liabilities and mortgages that you hold. The second set of financial statements are what we call your fund basis financial statements. And that's more of a current perspective, short-term perspective of your financial operations. And that's how you build your budget and monitor your financial activities against that short-term perspective. So on a government-wide basis, your liabilities and deferred inflows exceeded your assets and deferred inflows by $556 million. That is an improvement from the previous year. And that 556 million deficit, that's what we consider your net worth. But there's a lot of information that is outside of your control that impacts that number, including some very large numbers such as your post-employment health insurance benefits, as well as your participation in both the employees and teachers' retirement systems. So that can fluctuate significantly year over year depending on changes in those numbers. We did see an increase in your net position of $82.3 million. Your revenues increased by 12.6%, and your expenditures increased by only 1.2%. Again, that's on a government-wide basis. And that includes all of the impacts of those changes in those long-term assets and liabilities. The next page is really kind of walks you through how that translates from your change in your fund balance, which is, again, what you monitor and manage on a regular basis, all of the things that impact that number to get you to the change in net position on your government-wide financial statements. So you can see the impacts there of depreciation, payment of your long-term debt, decrease in the long-term pension liability. This is the first year in history that since we implemented GASB 68 about 10 years ago, that both retirement systems, the teachers and the employees' retirement systems, were overfunded as of the measurement date. What that means is that the plan's assets were more than sufficient to pay their projected liabilities. The market plays a large impact on that, so the market takes a downturn, we could see ourselves in a position where you have a pension liability on your books instead of a pension asset. But as of June 30th, both systems reported a pension asset. And then the last one is the post-employment benefit liability. That was a decrease of $33 million this year. Any questions on the differences?
Commissioner Powell?
The ERS, TRS, so a decrease in liability, I assume based on performance of the market, but what was the interest rate, what was the inflation rate that calculation was based on?
ERS, I believe, was, or TRS was 5.9 and ERS was 7.65, I believe.
Okay, so that could be a little misleading given that inflation year to date is something in excess of 8%, right?
That's true, and TRS has a measurement date of June 30th of 2021, where ERS has a measurement date of March 31st, 2022.
So they're based on basically last year's inflation, not this year's.
TRS is. ERS is March 31st, 2022. So that data is pretty current.
Mm-hmm. And what is driving up our is it health insurance that's driving up our post-employment benefits?
Actually, that decreased.
Oh, it says increase.
Oh, but it's showing as a negative. Hang on just a second. That decreased from $1.1 billion to $926 million. And the biggest decrease was changes in the assumptions, which included the discount rate used in valuing that at the present value.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
The next few pages, we talk primarily about your general fund, which is the fund that, holds most of your operating activities for the district. You did have a surplus this year of $33.3 million. That's a little bit less than it was previously. It did increase your fund balance in your general fund to $169 million. The primary difference between the 2 years was the amounts that were transferred from the general fund into the other funds as of some of that as a result of some of the COVID funding that was received. Your revenue and other sources increased by $49.7 million or 6.7%, primarily in the area of state and federal aid. And your expenditures and other uses increased by $56.7 million or 10.1%. And that was across most areas, the most significant being transportation, which, seeing that this was the first year that you had 100%, you utilized the transportation 100% of the year post-COVID. I don't think anybody was surprised by that. And your total fund balance represents about 20.2% of your 22-23 budget. And the next page gives you a little bit of history behind the fund balance classification and also benchmarks you against some of the other big 5 school districts. Your unassigned fund balance went up by $27 million or 105%. You can see that the total fund balance as a percentage of your 22-23 budget, as well as the unassigned fund balance as a percentage of your 22-23 budget, both of those numbers have shown a significant increase over the last 3 years. And if you look at a comparison of your unassigned fund balance in comparison to Buffalo and Syracuse, yours is a little bit lower, but you have committed funds that they don't have. Some of them have assigned funds that are higher than yours, but at least I provided you with some comparison information for your information. Any questions on any of that data? The overall message is that your fund balance is improving. The next page, we talk about a breakdown of all of your fund balance classifications. So seeing that you did have a fund balance surplus this year, where your revenues exceeded your expenditures, that did allow you the opportunity to fund some of your, just call them in general, reserves. That includes your reserves, committed funds, assigned funds. Markedly, the OPEB or other post-employment benefit that went up, that committed fund balance went up by $10 million this year. And again, that's against an almost $1 billion liability. The amount that you appropriated for the 22-23 budget, that did decrease down to $10 million. But last year, you had some very specific items included in there, including about $23 million for transportation and $10 million in CARES Act money that you knew that you were going to roll forward into the 2022 budget year. And then the next page is an analysis of how your actual results compare to not only the 2022 budget, but also 2021 actual revenues and expenditures. On the expense side, we did see that there were a number of positions that were moved out of the general fund because of COVID funding and that were placed in the special revenue fund. And also, we saw that there were some unfulfilled positions that resulted in some increases that were less than what was expected in comparison to the budget. On the revenue side, you actually did better on, you came in a little bit lower than budget, and that was in primarily the area of state aid. What you will see is in the budget, the amount appropriated for fund balance of $33.1 million. Because you had a surplus this year, you didn't need to use any of that amount that you had appropriated to balance the budget. That's very good news because that money just rolls forward into the 22-23 fiscal year and allows those funds to be reappropriated. So anytime that you don't need to use your appropriated fund balance is good news. Any questions on the general fund results?
Any questions from my colleagues? Doesn't appear to be any questions.
The next page talks about some of the results in the other funds. Your special aid fund, you had $140 million in grant funds this year. That's an increase from $97 million last year. You received additional education stabilization funding this year, as well as new emergency connectivity grant funding. Both of those were the subject of our single audit this year. Because both were deemed as high-risk programs by the funding agency. Plus, they were large dollar amounts this year for you. And like I said, we found no non-compliance issues within our single audit of those programs. Your school lunch fund actually had an operating surplus in the current year of $2.2 million. That's in comparison to an operating deficit of 1.3. This was the last year that you received the COVID funding for that, so it's anticipated that your revenue will probably decrease more consistent with the pre-COVID revenue here in the 22-23 fiscal year. The capital fund had $20.5 million in expenditure. That's up slightly from the previous year. And your debt service fund, you were transferred in almost $79 million from the general fund to pay your debt service obligations in the 21-22 fiscal year. Questions?
Yes, Commissioner Millay.
Thanks. Regarding the school lunch fund, so it said that we have a surplus for the current year, but then prior to that, we'd had an operating deficit. So do you anticipate a deficit in the 22-23 this school year or next year?
Most likely, you will have a deficit before you make any transfers in from the general fund, not only because you won't have the additional funding, the COVID funding that you received this year, but prices have increased. Anybody that goes to the grocery store knows that the cost of food has actually skyrocketed. So, those two things, short of a sizable transfer from the general fund, will most likely result in a deficit for the 22-23 fiscal year.
Have we been operating at a deficit in the school lunch fund for many years now?
It's been fairly break even, but I know that you had a transfer in about maybe $1.2 million in 21. I don't remember what it was prior to that. So you have budgeted a operating transfer from the general fund in previous years, knowing that, that fund doesn't necessarily fund itself.
Okay, thank you.
So we're operating at a break even.
Thank you. I just want to add to that, though, that our our food service organization, it really does a good job at reaching out to kind of the charters and some of the private and parochial. So their funding is really going to, it's based on meal counts. And they usually, pre-COVID, really tried to do a very good job at keeping the counts up to try to manage and then reinvest as much as they can. And if you recall, a few years back when we transitioned from the third-party vendor to us having it in-house, we actually have been making efforts to increase food quality as well, so that we are doing the higher grades as well as the desires, given the board's concerns surrounding food service and wanting to make sure the students are enjoying food.
Yeah, and to piggyback on that, the higher the participation, the better the program operates financially.
Any further questions?
Then the other report that we have provided to you is the management report of the board, the report to the board. We call our management report. It talks about our responsibilities to you as your auditors, and that was all outlined in our engagement letter. If there were any changes to accounting policies or practices, it's outlined in that letter. We do acknowledge that you did adopt GASB 87 this year. However, we didn't identify any significant or unusual transactions, and no alternative treatments of accounting standards. We're also required to discuss if there were any audit adjustments, or what we call past adjustments, of which we identified none. Given that you have a budget of over $800 million, to have no audit adjustments and no identified misstatements of your financial information is a true testament to the good quality that your accounting staff does in preparing for the audit and making sure that all the year-end accrual entries and adjustments are done prior to our audit. There were no significant issues discussed with management outside of the normal course of the audit. There's a number of estimates included in your financial statements. Those generally impact your government-wide financial statements. Those are all outlined and discussed in this report. No difficulties encountered in performing the audit. And there's also a page that discusses new accounting pronouncements that will be effective in future years. GASB never seems to take a break. The next one is GASB 96, which has to do with subscription-based IT arrangements. That will be effective for your 6/30/23 year. That is very similar to the lease standard that you implemented this year. It just takes it one step further to your IT contracts. So you need to, now that you've gone through all of your leases, you need to go through all of your IT contracts, and any of those that are long-term in nature, you need to adopt GASB 96 for next year. The other one that could potentially have some impact on you is GASB 101, which has to do with compensated absences. That one is really, was really established to discuss some consistency issues with how compensated absences are calculated. So that one is really just a clarification so that entities as a whole across all governments are consistent in their calculation of compensated absences. And that one's not due to be implemented until 6/30/25. The last section of our report to the board would communicate any things that we feel warrant your attention. I'm happy to say that we found no material weaknesses in your internal control, no significant deficiencies in the accounting information. There was just another matter discussed, and it had to do with your extracurricular activities. We did see some of the same issues as we've seen in the years past, but the number of instances of these findings we saw decreasing this year. So I know that you have, there's been a lot of effort to try and make improvements this year, or improvements in this area, and we have seen gradual improvements over the last few years. So you are definitely moving in the right direction, and all of your efforts seem to be paying off. Either that or we're getting really lucky in our test samples.
So I would like to just comment a little bit on that. I do work very closely with the finance organization as it relates to the student activity. We do perform the audits, and we have both CFO Barr in the back and as well as Carrie Couples in the back, where student activities do roll up to them. And so we have been improving our electronic systems to make sure that we have visibility to what's going on in the school. So it's a shared accounting system, which is going to facilitate documentation and information so that there's the completeness when the auditors do come in to perform the audits. The first time that came about was during the COVID period, because there was a great concern that I had that, everyone's shutting down, we're not going to have the records. So that was the first year we tried to really sweep and get copies of year-end documentation centrally in accounting to help facilitate the work that had to be performed. And now at this point, there's been further improvements that have happened in that particular area, where now we're going to be having all of the documents uploaded into the system throughout the year, so that there's actually an audit check or a verification within the accounting organization to ensure that the documentations are there, with hopes of trying to get past this or work ourselves towards an unmodified opinion, because we still hold ourselves to the standard of having the best available opinion for the work that we're doing. So there's considerable work that is going to take place. Even OAG is getting ready to do a central administration audit within student activity to see how we can support this, because it really isn't a good excuse to say it's always bad. At some point, we hold ourselves to the expectation that we're going to actually make it good. Thank you.
Any other questions with regard to our audits overall?
Any questions from any of my colleagues? It appears that there's none.
Well, thank you very much. It's truly been a pleasure working with the Rochester School District all these years.
Thank you.
Have a good evening.
You also.
I just wanted to say to her that I think you've been here working with us probably as long
10
as I've
years.
been on the board. Oh, just 10 years? I thought it was longer than that. I'm not sure who we had prior
Deloitte
to
before
that.
that.
But
We-
we do, we appreciate your professionalism, and I mean, it's just been, stellar, and to be able to interact with this board. I've often wondered, how can I get patience like you have patience? So, thank you so much for all that you've worked with us on. Thank you very much.
It's been our pleasure.
Okay. Can I have a motion to forward the annual financial report to the December 22nd business meeting?
So moved.
Second.
President Elliott, and seconded by
Commissioner
Malloy.
Malloy.
Commissioner Powell. All
Oh, it was Powell you took? Okay.
right.
Yeah, just
Are there any questions or comments? And can we have a verbal vote? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The ayes have it.
The system kicked me out, so I won't do online voting. I will just go ahead and do that for you. So I just want to make sure that if there are any final board questions as relates to the draft ACTFR that I sent before the Thanksgiving holiday, if there are any additional questions, I have the ability to take. If there's something pressing that we need to talk about tonight, then let me know what that is. Otherwise, I would love to receive those from you. Just to give administration sufficient time to respond to that, it would be great if within the next week, so by next Monday, the 12th, I have any questions or final concerns as it relates to that document, and any questions. I know there's a lot of information in there, and it's quite a big read, especially given it was a holiday weekend, but I did give you the whole week. We worked very hard to give you a few extra days on the front end. So please do forward those to us if you have questions. I will be having the resolution for you guys to accept, because this is due to the state. but I do want to make sure all of your questions are addressed.
Thank you. So at this point in time, the meeting will recess into executive session, close to the public for a confidential discussion with the external auditor. My colleagues, would you also I remind you to complete the board survey for the audit committee meeting.
So are you
And we
taking
will
a motion?
adjourn into executive session and come back out for policy.
So,
Is there a
Yeah.
motion?
yep, I make a motion.
Motion.
Second?
Motion by President Elliott, and seconded by
Second.
Commissioner Malloy? Commissioner Malloy.
Is there a vote?
All in favor?
All those in
Any opposed? The ayes have it. Once again, good evening. We have come out of executive session, and can I have a motion to adjourn
So moved.
Second.
by Commissioner Malloy and Commissioner Powell? Second, thank you. The next audit committee meeting will be March 7th.
Call for the vote.
How about a
All in
vote?
favor?
Oh, okay, let's see. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? The ayes have it.
Great.
Again, the next audit committee meeting will be March 7th, 2023.
This is the Policy Committee of the Whole, December 6th, immediately following the Audit Committee. I'd like to open the meeting with a motion to approve the agenda. May I have that motion?
So moved.
Moved by Commissioner Malloy, second by Commissioner Patterson. All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. There are no speakers on the speakers list. The next item is minutes for December 3rd, Policy Committee of the Whole. Do I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
I have a motion from Commissioner Malloy. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Commissioner Adams. Discussion? Concerns? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Do you need me to slow down? Are we going to vote online?
I've been doing everything manually, since you only have
Okay.
a few.
You can do everything manual, that's fine. Okay. The next item on the agenda is review of the New York State School Board Association policy recommendations. There are no recommendations. Next is the Code of Conduct Committee. There are no updates. This takes us to item number 4, new business. I was going to present a review of my findings of our board survey, but I'm not ready for that, so I'm going to do that for you in January, assuming I'm still your chair in January. Item 5, unfinished business. We have a board discussion largely centered around the policy 300 and policy 2000 and an attempt to merge those. Charisma, do you have that PowerPoint that we can bring up? Last month, you'll recall that we went through this slide and talked about the substantive difference between what we have and what NYSBA proposed, and the most glaring difference is that our policy referred only to the employment of the superintendent, and the NYSBA policy spoke only to the evaluation of the superintendent. And the language we came up with together was to merge those with employ and evaluate. Are there any concerns about the way this particular line is crafted? No concerns? In that case, if we could go to the next slide, Charisma. This one's a little bit challenging because we have 2 NYSBA bullets that more or less correspond to a single policy 2000 bullet. Charisma, are you able to like zoom in on that a little bit, make the text a little bit larger? And what should be better for our viewing audience, for everyone who's on board docs, it's the first PDF in the packet under new business. So our current policy reads, evaluate the board's performance in relation to its goals. Establish and clarify policies based on the results of such evaluation. So the NYSBA proposal starts with evaluate the board's performance in accordance with policy 310, evaluate the school board operations. And we don't have any language about operations. My question to you all is, would you just as soon keep it that way and not include language around school board operations? This would include things like bylaws and norms and standards and guidelines, all of which are in various places in our policy manual. Is there an interest in adding that kind of language or simply dropping the phrase evaluation of school board operations? Commissioner Malloy.
Is there a NYSBA recommendation?
The second column is the NYSBA policy.
Oh, okay.
And I've just read to you item number 3.
So the second column.
Right. So there's a substantive difference between our generic language to evaluate performance. So I'm really looking for guidance on whether we elaborate on that more or not. Commissioner LeBron?
Yeah, just 2 points for clarity. The numbers, like 3 and 2 on the first one, I think, which one are you at, 5-4? Are those like the I guess the bullet number associated with that policy in that order?
That's correct.
Okay.
I tried to match it up based on the content rather than on the numbers.
Okay, that makes sense. Okay, thank you for that. And then I just want to, for the second bullet point that we're on now, for number 4, where it says district long and short-term goals, I would support that language being added, primarily because we just had a discussion of how we're supposed to have long-term financial range planning, and that kind of fell through the cracks this last go-round, unfortunately, but we are going to move forward again with the administration and the board together, doing some training around long-term financial planning so that we can have a long-range financial plan. And I feel like this is where that would tie in to ensure that there's some accountability for us to all go to that training, but also commit to long-range planning. And we're required to do it from the state monitors, the long-range financial planning, not the training. But none of us really actually have long-range planning experiences for a multi-billion-dollar, billion-dollar organization. So just want to put that out there. So I would support the NISBA language. Oh my goodness. I would support that our policy 2000 be amended to align with the language as you have aligned them, 5 for bullet 3 and 4 into our policy. Thank you.
Okay, so point number 4, Charisma, if you would use all of point number 4 in lieu of our point number 5 in the third column. Oh, that's right, we can just cut and paste. That was quick. So are there any objections to that language from anyone else? Then that only begs the question, what about the NISBA bullet number 3? Evaluate the board's performance in accordance with. Do we want to expand upon that to include in accordance with type language?
That may need,
Please.
that may need to be removed because, we have had difficulty doing self-evaluations. And I'm wondering if we were to include policy similar to that, if that would be the same thing. That's sort of, from my perspective, is similar to the board's self-evaluation. And, we have not, all of us, completed that board self-evaluation. And so I would argue that we perhaps need to not include that, but just go with number 4.
I hear what you're saying, but number 4 is also self-evaluation. We're still evaluating our progress collectively, and we may need to change the questions we ask in a self-evaluation in order to meet this goal.
See, I was thinking that the number 3 referred more to the self-evaluation, but number 4 was more on, the goals, the work itself was my thought around that.
Well, keep in mind our existing policy reads, evaluate performance in relation to its goals. Number 4, in the policy 300 that NISBA recommended, reads, evaluate the progress toward achieving long and short-term goals. So there is strong similarity in those, but
Right.
both require self-evaluation. And there really isn't any getting around that. The fact that we haven't done it in the past is kind of neither here nor there. I mean, it's a failing on our part that we haven't, but it doesn't really speak to the fact that we have a policy, have had and are discussing continuing to have. So the question then is, are we going to just adopt our evaluation in the context of goals, or are we going to also evaluate it in the context of bylaws?
Well, I guess I'm somewhat, it seems that, our current policy and what is being proposed are similar. There may be some broader language, but I don't see very much difference, actually.
I would agree with you insofar as if we set goals that include
Short and long term?
evaluating our performance in accordance with bylaws and standards and guidelines and norms, then that will be in our agreed upon goals. So it might be redundant to have what currently is in place as number 3 in the NISBA policy.
I'm okay with what we have now, except number 4 is a little bit more specific in terms of long and short-term goals.
That's correct. It's more,
Yeah.
it's more specific than what we currently have in policy 2000. Well, I'm not hearing much chatter, so we're going to put the language from bullet 4 in the column, and we're going to review this particular page next month, and then hopefully move on to the next page, okay? All right, and I have to find my, oh, here we go. Okay, I think that completes item 5, unfinished business.
You also have the video conferencing one.
Yes, you want to, let's see, okay. We talked about this one a little bit last month. And we really don't have resolution. Do you want to pull up the PowerPoint slide again? So, I don't know if anyone's given any further consideration to this policy. I think our legal counsel has recommended that we adopt the NISBA policy in total. But the NISBA policy isn't very specific about the number of people who can participate via Zoom, whereas our current policy is very specific. And I really need guidance before I can bring you a revised policy. Are there any thoughts or concerns that you want to vocalize now?
I do.
Please.
I just want to note that the law actually also states that the quorum has to be in person. So it doesn't matter for me personally how many people are on Zoom for whatever reason, as long as the quorum is here for the public. So that's all I'm going to say about that.
Right. So, in theory, if we all agreed to that, in theory, you could have 3 people on Zoom at any given time, so long as no one is like completely unavailable, sick, out of state, out of Zoom range, whatever. What are people's thoughts about having it framed as up to 3 so long as a quorum can be established in person? Or
Up
language?
to 3, meaning on video.
Correct.
Yeah.
Is there,
Yeah, I think they, oh,
I support that.
okay, is there general agreement from others on that? I see Commissioner Adams nodding, I see Commissioner Malloy nodding. Do you have an idea about the total number of people who can be on Zoom at any given time? Commissioner Patterson?
Not at this present time. I'd like to look further into it before I respond.
Okay.
so Commissioner Powell, with regard to the time, is the board supporting it at least 24 hours? I sort of would argue that, or is that a part of the
Let me just recap that for Charisma. So the language we're contemplating is to change, to include in either version, a change from 1 participant to up to 3, so long as a quorum can be an in-person quorum can be established. And then we'll take that to legal counsel to see which of the 2 policies that's most easily integrated into.
So if we were not able to get an in-person quorum, would that mean that the meeting, Yeah, that would mean that we could not meet.
Correct. Correct. Absent exigent circumstances such as, state of emergency from the governor.
Okay.
Right? Or, now, if, let's suppose that a snow day, let's suppose, as outrageous as it is, that 5 feet of snow drops on Rochester like it did in Buffalo, and a citywide state of emergency were declared, would that permit us to meet 100% via Zoom, according to current state law?
Well, actually, that's a pretty good question. The regulation talks about state of emergency via the state, right? Whether a city state of emergency would suffice is an answer I'll get back to the board on.
Thank you. Okay. So that does take us then to your question, Commissioner Elliott, about 24 hours notice. So the important element of that is simply being able to obtain quorum, right? If we don't know how many people want to be on Zoom prior to the meeting, we also don't know if we can establish an in-person quorum. So we really do need to have some kind of an operating window. And it's not meant to penalize anybody or cut anybody off, but it's just a means by which we can plan whether we're even going to be able to hold a meeting. So please.
I found the answer a lot quicker than I thought I would. So a local, it can be pursuant to Section 28 of Executive Law, or local state of emergency proclaimed by the chief executive of a county, city, village, or town, pursuant to Executive Law. So the states of emergency are pretty broad.
Okay, so if the mayor declared a state of emergency, we would be able to revert to a 100% fully remote meeting, okay? Yeah, so that takes us back to the 24-hour question. We haven't really practiced this because we're so recently back from being able to do 100% remote. So I'm totally open to the consensus of the board as to whether 24 hours is enough notice. My thinking is that we need that much because if we can't get a quorum, we have to be able to cancel the meeting and give appropriate notice to the public to either cancel or postpone a meeting on the basis of lack of quorum. So does 24 hours continue to be a reasonable expectation? Commissioner Malloy?
But with the understanding that there are exceptions that sometimes happen, like a child gets ill at the last moment, or, there's an family emergency of some type, or personal illness.
Sure. So if notice is being given to the chair of the committee, then those who do give notice 24 hours in advance will provide insight as to whether we are going to be able to have quorum, right? So if it's close, let's say we've got, we've got 2 people who've already said they want to be, let's say we already have 3 people say, I'm going to be online, thank you very much, right? Let's assume for a moment we've already said we allow up to 3, right? So if 2 hours before the meeting, somebody has a sick child, you call the chair of the meeting, it's already a problem, right? If 3 people have already signed up to participate via Zoom or remotely, then we won't be able to achieve that goal. So how often is that likely to happen? So long as everyone else who is participating via Zoom gives notice well in advance, the chair of the meeting can know whether that there's any risk of the meeting not going off as planned, right? So, what say you all?
I would just add, I don't know necessarily it should go to the chair, only because, like, if y'all call me and I'm working, I may forget in that moment that I got a phone call or a text message, I may not even reply, and then it'll be nighttime by the time I remember, and now the meeting's rolling up and I forgot that. I personally would rather that it's going to our board clerk. Whether someone's not going to be able to make it, I don't personally care about the timeline, although I do agree with Commissioner Powell, because there have been times where President Elliott and myself didn't know we were going to have quorum from folks who didn't communicate whether they were going to be here or not. And I do think at some point we do have to address what's an allowable, period to miss a meeting, because absences have been a little bit atrocious this year. But that, I think, also needs to be spelled out, even within this policy, what constitutes and notice at least up to 24 hours in advance. I personally would prefer the language that says notice up to at least minimally 24 hours, which means if you know 2 weeks from now you're not going to be here at the next meeting, that doesn't preclude you from waiting 24 hours to let someone know. You know, you can let people know in advance. Typically, what I do tend to do is I will send the clerk like known dates I will not be available for whatever reason as much in advance as I can, and try to communicate that so folks know. And if something happens where I'm technically not here, I have to join via Zoom, it's usually something not planned. But I would just personally prefer to see language that says up to at least 24 hours notice in advance, with the understanding that nothing stops a board member from giving advance prior notice to that. And also that we acknowledge that unforeseen circumstances, family life events may happen and occur, and that it's in good spirits. I say that because we can all have that understanding. A new board can come in, or new board members in 2 years, a year from now, may not have that understanding that, yes, this board agreed to it in the policy. So rather than it be something implied, I would rather that it be explicitly stated within the policy language. Thank you.
Perhaps you could message Charisma with the language you just said, or repeat it again for Charisma. And by the way, Charisma, can you put up slide 2 instead of slide 3, because that's really what we're talking about. Thank you. So could you restate what your suggestion was?
Yeah, I'm going to email it to her right now, Commissioner Powell.
Okay.
That way she doesn't have to then listen to the tape and type it.
Okay. So to react to what you said about communicating with the clerk, that does add layers, because the clerk isn't necessarily the person who is clerking taking the minutes for our meeting. We have different staff members, like Charisma right now is representing the policy committee for us now. She's not the clerk of the board. So now we're introducing a need for some formal communications, board member to clerk, clerk to staff member that supports the committee, staff member that supports the committee has to share it with the chair of the board, or chair of the committee. You know, it might be, it might be more direct to include all the parties, you know, if we know, you know, most of us know who is clerking or for any given committee. So the more people we can include in that correspondence, the better. In fact, if we can communicate because we're committees of the whole, to the whole board, then it becomes more clear to anyone who may have something come up at the last minute, like who, what the stack is for remote participation, and know whether their presence or absence would threaten a quorum.
I just want to respond that I will not be emailing or reaching out to every board member about whether I'm coming or not. However, I do and would support President Elliott's recommendation of saying and/or. We only have 2 staff people right now currently besides that support the board committees. There's only 2. It's Charisma and Rahima, and Charisma reports up to Rahima. I don't think it's that much more difficult. I actually think it's more difficult to put the ominous on board members to then communicate with communications around needing a Zoom room or not. But at this point in 2022, after the pandemic, we should all be accustomed to having a Zoom link available just in case for anybody, because we also have other folks like the state monitor that joins via Zoom and is not always available being present. So in my opinion, we should always have a Zoom link anyway available, and I would support language that says and/or.
Okay. So we'll take these recommendations back. We'll see how they can be inserted into both our existing policy and the NISBA recommended policy, and then we'll present you with an either-or proposition. Okay? So does that finish that aspect of our unfinished business, Charisma? Thank you. Okay. So we have a lot of other policies that are in the pipeline. They're currently like pending cabinet approval. I don't suppose, Charisma, you have a list of what is where at this point for everyone's edification?
Are you specifically talking about the ones that subcommittees still have, or the ones that's actually out there for the board meetings?
Well, folks only need to look at our board agenda to see what's in the pipeline in terms of first and second readings, we're not advancing anything for first readings, so there's not going to be any for the next business meeting. But there's a second reading, and there's policies. More interested in sharing what we covered in our last subcommittee and what is pending at cabinet level consideration. Do you happen to have that on hand?
Yes. So right now we have the 8,000 series that is with Executive Cabinet that should be presented next month in January, which is the support services policies. And then currently right now subcommittee is reviewing the 9,000 series, which is employees. And so that should come to you in February, as well as policy 0201, I believe it is, the equity policy. That one, if you recall, was brought back to subcommittee at last month's business meeting. And so that one will also come back hopefully in February.
Mm-hmm. Are there any other questions about the direction the board is, or the committee is headed over the next month or two? Hearing none, I'll ask you all to take a few minutes to go through the policy committee, the whole survey. As you recall, I have slightly different questions than our generic one, including a couple of open-ended questions for feedback. And as I said at the beginning, I do want to report out on this in January, so I'm hoping that we'll all take the time to fill it out so I can give you the most robust report possible. if you're ready, if everyone's ready, you could just turn your mic on so I can see you're all done. Yeah, me too. You can, I'll check with Charisma after the meeting, how you can get access to that link. Charisma, would you be able to send the link to President Elliott, since she's not able to get into Board Docs? Is there anyone else who would like to be able to access it that way? So if everyone's finished, I'd be happy to entertain a motion to adjourn, and understanding that there is an executive session after, just for the general public.
So moved.
Okay, a motion to adjourn from Commissioner Malloy,
Second.
seconded by Commissioner Adams. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you, everyone, for your attention. It was blissfully short, which I always appreciate. Thank you.
I have a motion to go into executive session to discuss matters leading to the appointment of a specific individual and/or to discuss matters of concern with the general counsel.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Second moved by Commissioner.
He wants us to add additional language?
No, that's fine. I mean, from a technical basis, an executive session should always be called from an open meeting. So that.
Oh,
Right, so technically before the meeting was adjourned, the executive session should have been called, but.
You can call a special meeting.
Yeah, so, right.
Go ahead, President Elliott, calling the special meeting.
so I'm calling a special meeting of the board.
Motion.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. So we're going to go into executive session and need a motion to discuss matters leading to the appointment of a specific individual and/or to discuss matters of concern with the general counsel. Is there a motion?
Motion.
Moved by Commissioner Malloy. Is there a second? Seconded by Vice President LeBron. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right. Any opposed? So we thank you for joining us. We will adjourn from our executive session. Have a great night, and we'll see you soon.